choose to say grace before you eat your meals. You can choose to go to the temple before work or during lunch breaks. There are a plethora of means that are available for any individual to show faith beyond just going to church every single Sunday. But secondly, what is the world on opposition? The works model is one that is incredibly calculative because you live your life as a routine of a checklist. You check what you're doing in your life in contrast to the things that you ought to do, the things that your religion tells you ought to do in order to go to heaven. This looks like things like you have to donate to the church, or it looks like things like volunteering to be a part of service regularly. But B, there is a pressure to not sin due to it being a crimson red stain on your cream clothes. It is following the 10 commandments in a very rigid manner because you do not want to do anything that may harm your chances of going to heaven. My first argument then in this debate is on why grace provides unconditional solace in the face of human imperfection. The first part I want to explain to this argument is on the problem. Under the save to work model, there are numerous issues under this. Firstly, it is incredibly difficult to quantify a good deed. You are always going to question yourself as to whether you ought to perform to be like what you ought to perform to be fulfilling the things that your religion tells you to be checking boxes off the checklist. You're going to ask yourself, is this enough to get me to be sent to heaven? But it also means because it's very difficult to quantify a good deed, you're going to compare yourselves to your peers. You're going to see someone else in church donating more money than you, so they're more likely to go to heaven than you. But this also leads to an incredibly negative feeling of self-doubt, of feeling inadequate compared to your peers, because you are going to question whether you can truly get to go to heaven if there's someone else who's always doing more than you in the eyes of God under opposition's model. But the second reason is that for individuals with no choice but to commit a sin, those who are coerced into it by the structural forces, these are individuals like gay people who just cannot choose to be straight because it's an innate part of their identity. Opposition's model is one that tells them that they are violating what the religion tells them. They are going against the word of God. Therefore, they are committing an active sin. But it's also the people who steal food or commit crimes out of necessity. These are individuals under Op's model who are excluded regardless because they have the coercive structural forces against them. The conclusion to this problem is simple. Ethiopia cultivates an overly punitive religious community. It is exemplified in when your religious parents send you to conversion camps or conversion therapy to save you from God's punishment or save you from the eternity in hell. So they think that they are doing it in your best interest, but in actuality, it is harming a fundamental part of your identity, something that you cannot choose to willingly do. What is the comparative? I think it's relatively simple and twofold. Firstly, it is better on Malaysia's model because grace has far lower barriers to entry. Faith is an intrinsic part of any of us. All of us can opt into religion if we choose to believe in God, and individuals can choose to fulfill this relationship of believing to this religion independently. And this is important because you're always able to believe in God at any point of your life, but you cannot always abide by religious laws and the impositions of these laws that opposition does to you on their side of the house. The second part to this comparative is that the alternative support systems for individuals that are excluded on the SAVE model are excluded on opposition's model are uniquely included on Malaysia's side. The people who are ostracized on op are also more likely to be excluded from society anyway, because society generally rewards things like having positive actions and positively contributing to the community. What this means is the importance is clear. This is a unique benefit that Malaysia is able to bring to you in this debate because religion is the only mechanism and provision of support structures for these people that I've outlined in the first argument. And what this means is that they can uniquely turn to religion as a support structure on our side of the house. Before my second argument on opposition salvation enabling the prophetization of the vulnerable, I'll take your POI.
The motion says that faith through work is applicable regardless of what religion you believe in. How does your characterization of our side that we empower institutions stand then?
So actually, the people who don't opt into religion are not as important because they don't really care about whether they go to heaven or hell, insofar that they're not believing that God is sanctioning me to hell based on my decisions. Second argument then, the premise is simple. The Safe to Works model is the proliferation of abusive institutions. I want to characterize what this is, because it's not just the malevolent priest or pastor, but it's also the subtle ways of manipulation that my argumentation is going to explain to you. The first part I want to explain is why is this likely to happen? Twofold. Firstly, there is a power imbalance of leaders and followers. You are told by your priest that you have to help perform this volunteer role on the weekend because you have to fulfill your obligations to God in order to be a good person. You have to do this thing to help the church in order to be given the grant and permission to go to heaven. It also looks like things like the mega churches in the status quo, pressuring people to donate money to them in order for the church to function to a better degree. And what this means is that people are just obligated and they feel like they need to donate this money in order to be accepted by God in order to go to heaven. But secondly, it is far easier to convince believers that they'll help and that good deeds are an obligation to God. So it's easier for believers to now believe on opposition, why you need to perform this good deed, you need to help this certain person in order for you to fulfill what God is expecting of you. What is the impacts? I think it's incredibly clear. Firstly, you lock out the people with less material resources. So not everyone can afford to give a mega church $1,000 a year in order to be accepted through God in the lens of the pastor. What this means is that poor people on scale are just far more harmed on opposition. And it's not just a minority I like to flag out, because there's all these issues like the cost of living crisis. Individuals are unsure whether they can put food on the table 2 months down the line. But right now, the church is obligating them to give money to help the church function. What this means is that those who lack material resources are locked out far more on Ethiopia's model. But secondly, the church is sanctioning individuals to a punishment for the same crimes that the rest of society does. You already cannot afford a good standard of living because of your low income, but you are told by the people in your religious community, the people who ought to protect you the most, they are telling you that you cannot have achieved a pathway to heaven because you haven't committed enough good deeds into accessing this pathway. The conclusion is incredibly simple. This is not just at the abusive extremes of malevolent actors, but it's the benevolent leaders who want to help you. They think that they should guide you to performing these good deeds as an obligation for you to fulfill because it means that you can access a pathway to heaven. And this is incredibly beneficial to our side of the house, because what this means is that we're not just helping a small subset of people, but we're helping a lot of people on the larger scale, because a lot of people, and we assume of best case, all benevolent institutions and all benevolent leaders. Thus, we have proved that the likelihood is incredibly high. At the end of this debate, we live in a world that is as cruel, as unforgiving as ours. The least that we ought to do and can spare ourselves and each others is some grace. For all those reasons, I'm incredibly proud to propose.
Thank you for that speech. Now invite the leader of opposition here.
My camera isn't working, so I'm just gonna do this. Proposition's world is one where Osama bin Laden could have a last-minute clutch and go to heaven if he says, I accept Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, while those who aren't religiously affiliated but led a very righteous life are denied from are deserve an eternal damnation. We are very proud to oppose some responses to Proposition's case. We want to point out they have mischaracterized what our side is standing for. Their whole idea at first is about how power imbalancement is going to come and how world is going to be coerced. In the POI, we pointed out that within our model, people that are not religiously affiliated are going to be included. But they tell us that they don't have any incentives to have this idea of heaven and hell. We want to point out that people that exclude themselves from religion are because of dogmatic imbalancement, or because they don't align with the dogma which is needed for you to believe in their faith. We believe that more people are going to lead, and we're going to have a greater scope of people under our side, because you do not have dogma over their head every time. And they tell us that power imbalancement is going to happen because people are going to compare people who donate a lot or who does more deed. But we want to tell you, it is symmetric under their side too. If you go to temple every day, you have to pray grace before every meal. But if you skip one meal, you are not truly faithful. Do you pray 2 times a day, 1 time a day? The same thing can happen, all right? The same thing is symmetric. But we tell you we're much better under our side, which I'm going to prove with my first speech, with my first argument, sorry. But before, some points of framing that. First is that we want to tell you that most religious institutions throughout, it could be Islam, Christianity, the entire Abrahamic religion, what these religious institutions consider to be good is somewhat consistent and is you tending to be a good person or not inflicting any harm upon another. But the second point of framing we want to emphasize is that safe through work can be applicable on 2 types of people. First is those people who are religiously affiliated, and second can be people that are not religiously affiliated because they are not pushed because of this dogmatic misunderstanding. They have this idea they are applicable to going to heaven because now it is upon their deed and not exactly what the church or the dogma is inherently believing in. But the third thing we want to point out is that on how dogma won't have that much power on their side. Christianity, from the moment of origin, has been separated into 50 or more than different religious affiliations. We believe that under our side, that would not have happened because the dogma isn't going to have that much power. But we still think that dogma is still going to have some type of power. Why? We believe that good deed upon religious institution is different. For example, in Hinduism, eating cow is considered to be a sin or is not a good deed or is not morally justified, right? So eating a cow, if it's not morally justified, we believe that dogma is going to have some type of power because throughout religious institutions, what good deed is going to be a bit verified. But under their side, if a person does not believe in an entire dogma, they're going to question their religion. But if under our side, if a person believes that what they consider to be morally good is not right, then he can opt into being a vegan. We believe that the dogmatic power under our side is somewhat less, meaning that we have more people are under our side. But the fourth thing we want to point out is that they tell us that work is measured and how much money you donate. We want to point out that work is is through your intention. Your good deed is how much you have able to help, right? If I have $100, me donating some part of it, even though it's not going to be the same as a person with $1 billion, we believe that his person is going to be safe because the intention is what's going to matter, right? A poor person can help another person on the street that has fallen down. We believe that is in and of itself is a good deed, and that is what our style stands for. And the last thing we want to point out under our framing is that this idea is more about the people of the day-to-day people. We believe that radical believers or religious institutions, people that are opt into these religious institutions and are in the hierarchy of this religion institutions are still going to practice their faith to the maximum point. We believe that this religion is applicable to the everyday individuals or the servers within this religious institutions, right? Before I go on to my first argument, I'll take your POR.
Religion can be opted into a plethora of ways, as I explained to you in my speech, but not everyone might go to church because they don't have a good relationship with their pastor. Why would they be condemned to hell on your side of the house?
We believe that is exactly why people won't have the idea of going to church or won't have the time to always pray or all those things that is needed for you to be faithful. But we believe if a person can perform these moral deeds or moral goods in their time, they can have these small times where they help their co-workers, where they donate whatever money they have. So we believe that we are much better for the revolving and progressive world that we live in right now, right? So first argument is on the individual. Our claim is that safe through work is better for the believers of the foothold of the believers. Why? First, we want to flip their entire argument, saying that faith is more arbitrary than whatever money you donate or work you do, right? Why? Because the people are going more skeptical and questioning their belief. So if you fundamentally believe what you believe in, or your faith, some people might think they're not faithful enough. So that is why we believe faith in and of itself is arbitrary. But when you do work, we believe that you're opting into something, you're helping every day, you're doing little things, because in our framing, we tell you those little things, your intention is truly what matters. People tend to have more control over it, right? But the second thing is that kids are indoctrinated in this faith. We believe under our side we are much better because we're going to be a moral guide for these kids instead of indoctrinating them. And the third and most important one is that there's going to be less identity clash because the dogma is not going to be held over your head. Why? Because more LGBTQ affiliated or minorities that don't necessarily align with the church still have a hope of going into heaven because now it is upon their deed, right? And the fourth thing is that people don't have an idea of they might be opting into the wrong religion, right? Because now it's not just about dogma, it's about your good deed. So this fear of opting into the wrong religion is reduced under our side, right? Why is this important? Because we believe fulfillment and satisfaction is going to be greater under our side, and we kind of tend to have morality can be more objective. But the second argument is about on the society overall. We believe that religious liberalization is going to be prevalent under our side because in our framing, we told you that dogma isn't going to have that much power. For example, the Methodist Church believes in work through salvation through work, and they accept the LGBTQI community within their believers, right? So we believe that if people believe that their work is going to lead them to heaven, they're more incentivized. There's more push for these people to actually do good deeds, to consider it to be morally right. We believe that this has a big implication of the society in and of itself, right? Because people have great incentives to do work, meaning that there's going to be less harm that is raised by religious institutions themselves, because people think that if I do a wrong thing, that I'm not going to help. So we believe that there's going to be a shift of moral compass. Instead of me praying every day, it is me doing good things. It is me actually helping my community or my church within that people, right? So the impact we believe is that there's going to be more social understanding and people are going to be less weaponized by religion because it is the good thing and the little things that count. Very proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker for that speech. I invite the Deputy Prime Minister here.
Okay. 1 second for me to organize. Every chapter of the Quran begins with Allah being the most gracious and the most merciful. Every church sermon starts with how the Lord has mercy and how the sinners will be saved. The church and religion is the status quo, and the reason as to why it has become such a strong force until centuries until now is because the sinners has built the church, but this opposition will lock them out, and therefore they have no ability to opt into heaven on their side. I have two issues in this speech before moving on to an extension. Firstly, let's tackle the quibble on the measurement of faith and the measurement of work, and which side has better measurement and which side do people do good overall. They tell you that it's better that they assert that good deeds on their side of the house will be judged based off of intention. So it's actually not true that people would need to donate a large amount to go to heaven, for example. And this is their only response towards our entire case of the potentiality of abuse, for instance. There are three responses under this to prove as to why the measurement of work will be one that is incredibly harmful within religions and how the people opt into it. Firstly, I would like to observe that a mechanism proven by Team Ethiopia in this round has been non-existent, and I think the reason as to why people do judge it based off intention at this point has been a complete assertion. Second, why is it that this is likely untrue? I think good deeds and what people do on their side would not be judged based off intention, but based on what is most utile to society, and being the most utile and getting the most visible types of good deeds is what gets you towards heaven, and therefore people are more pressured to do this unhealthily on their side. Because religion that often carries out these types of safe through works or safe through grace motifs are often organized religion, and in order to do this, they need to assert control and facilitate and have some structure towards how they create their dogma. That means in order for people to opt into it, they need to tell people what to do. That is why they will ask for X amount of donations and do X amount of good work for society and do X amount of volunteer hours to be awarded in the church, for example, that's exactly why the religion itself requires a structured approach that often relies on utilitarian metrics so that people can easily opt into them. I think that's one clear reason as to why it will not just be based off intention and individualized capacity, but rather by how much the church tells you to do, because people, that is the only way they know how to opt into it on their side. Second, I think naturally, because measurement of work and how you are working within society is something that is naturally tangible and something that you can observe and measure by other people and what you do on your own, that means the work that you do naturally will be compared to what other people do. That means there exists a natural pressure as well from the individual religious believer to want to do more than you can, even if it's more than your capacity, because you see the woman who sits next to you in church does more than you, and you believe that she's more likely to get into heaven if she does it more than you compared to you, even if you weren't able to do it on your side of the house. I think because of the tangible metrics that they concede on their side of the house that is inherent to measurement of work, that is when you create a very unhealthy comparison between religious followers on their side that pressures people to want to do more than they can, which also means you create an unhealthy types of mindset on Team Ethiopia's side of the house, which is why you will not be based just off of intention. And even if so, people's intentions would be to do more than you can, which we believe is harmful for the most vulnerable because it locks them out. Thirdly, why is this exclusive? I think we've proven to you since birth that faith is likely an individualized metric of how you go into heaven because it is something intangible, right? Team Ethiopia paints this to be something that's actually a harm because people get scared over what they do is actually not enough. I think this is untrue and we completely reject this premise. I think exactly because it is individualized and the church already recognizes that insofar as you pray and you integrate prayer or you integrate the belief in God in every single thing that you do, that is exactly why you would still be able to opt into it without being overly supervised, for example, by a religious elder. And it's also feasibly something you cannot police by other people, which is why the intangible metric, we flip it on its head. That's exactly why it's better on our side, because that is how people are able to decide whether or not they get into heaven in a way that is individualized. At the end of this clash, I've proven to you as to why the measurement of work on their side will be one that creates a race to the top, but that is harmful because it structurally locks out people who cannot opt into certain types of work. And note, they've never given to you any response towards this other than the assertion that you are going to be judged based off your intention. I think the most vulnerable, the poor who cannot donate all the time, or the poor who cannot take out time to volunteer hours because they're working 3 jobs a day, these are the people who feel like there are not enough, and that individually locks out people from religion. Their religion double punishes people by circumstance and also in religion again. I think that is when people are locked out and are way more harmed on Team Ethiopia's side of the house. Second issue, very simply, they assert in their second argument that generally their side is better because more people do good deeds and good deeds are great. I think there are 2 responses under this. Firstly, this is not exclusive. I don't think religion is the only framework that allows people to do good deeds. We've given to you multiple reasons as to why this will exist anyways on either side of the house. One, because people can do good deeds from the heart, because I think most humans actually do have compassion for the people around them insofar as you have a family or you have a friend and you want to help them out for individualized circumstance without any religious undertone. That's why I think on our side, we do not have to trade off good deeds completely. So it's incredibly absurd for their case to be one where you have more good deeds in general. I think there are more reasons as to why people do good deeds anyways within society without a religious undertone. Secondly, they also assert, and a large part of their case is that it's bad that people who go to heaven are also people that do bad things in society. For example, their whole opening line about Osama bin Laden going to heaven, right? I think there are 2 things under this. Firstly, this exact actor is likely a minority on either side of the house, because a person who opts into the measurement of faith, for example, and does have faith in a religion are likely people who already do not go around doing bad things to people. So I think these are people who are often integrated within the religion doctrine and do opt into religious communities, are not people who outright carry out attacks on people in broad daylight because they overall believe in the values structured within that religion. But secondly, I think this is symmetrical. People can also do good and also do bad at the same time, but just do more good to hide the fact that they do bad things in their downtime. I think at worst, the very minority of these individuals also exist on their side. So I don't think it's a large part of this round anyways. On the third argument then, I think the safe
faith through works doctrine creates a moral framework that is transactional and not genuine. And this takes their second argument also at best. Assuming more people do good deeds, we actually pose to you that's a worse off harm on Team Ethiopia's side of the house. Firstly, in terms of the problem, I think two things. A, it creates a race to the bottom where people only do moral acts that are the most visible. So not only are you forced to do big things, but you only do things that other people can see. And this is likely because the narrative is fueled by religious structures and the people around you, where each homily that a priest gives is like to go forward and do good. And in order to feel validated by these people, sorry, at 7, you must do visible work. The implication is that you choose to donate only to the popular charities that are well known, or only donate to the largest conflicts in the world and easily sweep away smaller conflicts. And this means people only do good by playing in things like Oppression Olympics and only helping people that are more visible to society, and therefore locking out the unlucky who aren't as spotlighted. B, even if you don't buy my first structural reason, I think this also creates performative acts of morality where you only do good to guarantee a spot with God the Father in heaven, but not because of actual reasonings like you took the time to care about others, or you took the time to sit with the homeless and listen to their stories instead of just throwing money at them and assuming that it shelves your burden. I think on their side of the house, even if you have more utile moral works, the intention that people give is something that is transactional for their afterlife, but not necessarily what people actually care about, which creates a way more like single-minded society that is incredibly shallow. And for all those reasons and more, we are so proud to propose.
Okay, am I audible?
Speech. Yes, you're audible. Good to go.
Okay, I am also not able to turn on my camera, so I think I'll just go on with this.
Yep. No,
Okay, let me organize my notes and I'll start. Okay. I'll start on my first word. In the Bible, when people shamed a poor woman for donating less to the church, Jesus Christ said that she has donated more than any rich person that is here presently, and that he valued her intention and what she showed. This shows us, panel, that the religious dogma itself is one that values intention in the good deed and not the actual monetary value. Don't buy into their opinions that they've given you so far that says that faith through work only means donating money. No, it doesn't. Even the motion doesn't say it does that, right? There's moral conduct and also good deeds in general that do not revolve around giving money. First and foremost, let me respond to some ideas they've given you on our case so far. What have they told you on personal pressure? What they tell you is that it's actually going to make you feel, it's going to make people more pressured, right? First and foremost here, I think that they're going to say, I think that their idea on people being more demanded through on our side is just not going to be a good thing, right? I think the likely outcome is demanding entry through other ways of good things are going to be what's happening. I don't think poor people who don't have any amount of money to give are going to be donating to these religious institutions, even though if they don't have money. First, because the religious dogma already values them for thinking of donating even when they don't have the ability. But also, secondly, I don't think they're just going to buy into religions that demand these types of good things for them. Because according to the motion, it says that people, regardless of their beliefs, can be opting into good deeds and save through work ideas. And as such, the universal opinions on what good deeds are can make us attain heaven and be saved, right? But also on their ideas of intangible helping existing, right? They say that how you help people cannot exist, but also on our side of the house, prayer and going to church are just more controllable. It's just a crazy idea, because we will try to tell you, panel, that prayer and going to church are exactly the kind of deeds that get you into heaven on our side of the house, in the worst case scenario and in the best case scenario as well. These are good deeds that you're doing. This is having a good moral conduct, and as such, we're still going to have this on our side of the house. But also that they tell you these ideas on how people will just do good things from the heart on their side of the house. We have two responses. First and foremost, why do we have this opinion that people will just do good things from the heart because they care about people? Because this is already coded into our social contract within society that tells us that do unto others what you would have them doing to you. Care what if you were in their place. Empathy. These are all opinions and ideas and ideologies that have basis under religion, right? And as such, on both sides of the house, it's likely to be transactional because on their side, they're believing into religious dogma that says do unto others on what you would have them do to them. But on our side, they're just also buying into these ideas that say what you do to other people are what get you in, what get you entry into heaven. So it's symmetric on both sides of the house on this opinion, right? On the first clash then, on the clash on religious believers, they say that believers will be institutionally locked out of religion. We have some observations under this. The first one is that these religious institutions have dogma that says the amount of is not what matters, just like you did it. The intent is valued in the dogma. And if they want to claim that dogma will still have some amount of value on our side of the house, we can just claim that this dogma will have value and it will actually force people to buying into opinions and ideas that value intention behind the good deeds and the moral conduct behind the good deeds, right? But also the second is that works does not just mean money. It is a good deed and moral conduct which are not inherently dependent on money. Being kind to somebody, helping somebody when they're falling down, these are the type of good deeds that get you entry, and these are just much more likely to be controlled, with the believer on our side of the house. They're not very arbitrary, right? Under the worst case, our side gives people more power over salvation, because if I believe my friends are more faith, then it's not really measurable. What does more faith mean? But money is. So our side is just more tipping points on measurability, right? But on the second clash then is on religious institutions demanding money. That's what they give you, right? The religious institutions will actually abuse this power. This directly engages with our third argument. But before I move on, we have three responses to this idea that they try to give you. The first one is that this is a retrospective motion, which means that in our world, religions adopted this idea since the beginning. As such, religions who are in their infancy, in their youth, just don't have the social capacity and social capital to demand harsh amounts of money, and as such they're just more likely to prioritize deeds as in just helping people in ways that do not require big amounts of money. But also, even if you don't buy into this idea of the motion being retrospective, people will probably not buy into these religions if they demand large amounts of money. They'll just do universal goods that get them access into multiple religions at the same time, since you're being saved through your good deeds. I think the delta here is on the people who believe to a certain religion, but they have this fear inside them of what if I pick the wrong religion? What if I'm not going with the correct idea of the Almighty? On our side of the house, what the Almighty wants is just a list of good things, and if you apply to all of these things, the likelihood of you going to hell based on the religion that you chose is just low, right? But also on our side, even people that don't buy into religious institutions and religious ideas are just more likely to buy into these good deeds idea, because they want access to heaven, even if they don't want even if they don't want these dogmas that come with it. That is why people are buying in out of these religious ideas. But also, they don't demand big amounts of money. Religions just don't demand big amounts of money, and we believe that religious institutions are just going to be very likely to demand money that goes along with the dogma. On our side of the house, mega churches are not going to be asking very crazy amounts of money, because people can just quote Matthew to them and they just don't have to do it, right? Before I move on to my extension, then I'll take a point really fast.
If debate is about poor people, then they're still living under the burden to do something on yours. While Save Through Grace says that you as a person will be loved by God in heaven, ours is unconditional, as the info slide describes.
Okay, I understand what you're trying to say here, but the idea that we're trying to give you here is on our side of the house, poor people actually receive value for their intention to help people despite being poor. On your side of the house, the problem is, since people can commit more time to prayer and going to church, if you're trying to say that poor people don't have time to actually be donating, we can just flip that and say that poor people don't have time to be going to church every Sunday, going to prayers, going to every type of religious things that happen where you get it through your faith, right? But we tell you that on our side of the house, religious people will actually be able to control the good things they're doing. A poor person can still have a good moral conduct. A poor person can still have a poor person can still have good deeds that they're trying to do that don't depend on money. On your side of the house, these demands that come with being saved through faith and just faith alone are going to be very locking out for poor people, because they believe that rich people have more time to be committed to their faith to God, right? But on the broader picture, then our claim is that a world where religious institutions had the emphasis on the believing part of religion is very susceptible to being corrupted by religious and political institutions. What are our warrants for this? The first one is that in history, religions have been known to try and get power through wars for religions, right? They try to get more believers, and emphasis on believers leads to the crusades, to Islam jihads. That's what's happening. Like, emphasis on believing, on having more believers. On our side of the house, your ability to be a believer within a religion is not something that actually gets you access to heaven. On our side, what gets you access to heaven is doing good deeds, right? And good deeds, as we've told you already, are generally very universal. But also, political parties are also known to utilize dogma and the influence it has to push certain ideas and perspectives. Why do we think this is true then? We think that on our side of the house, people are just more likely to buy into religious dogma, and as such is going to have more influence over the people, and that is why very heavily conservative parties have been able to utilize it in the current day, right? On our side of the house, we have less emphasis on the dogma, but as such, these people have less ability to influence the people over what they're trying to do. What do you have comparatively? On our side of the house, people are just less influenced, and also people have more control over their ability to get into heaven, because doing a good thing is much more concrete than having faith. And because of all these reasons, we're very proud to oppose.
Thank you for that speech. I now invite the prop whip head here.
Am I audible? When salvation no longer becomes something that was unconditional, but something based on where you stand on your moral scoreboard at the end of the day, I think opposition creates a world where people will constantly judge for their actions rather than actually forgiven. There are two issues in this speech. Firstly, which side creates individual solace? Secondly, how does this affect institutions? But before that, a few strategic observations. Firstly, this opposition operates on a very poor understanding of the world and what a safe through grace model actually looks like. Because their main criticism down the bench is that people on our side of the house cannot achieve salvation because they cannot believe in the full extent of the dogma, that they disagree with some aspects of dogma. And they tell us this was exactly why our model was far more inaccessible for people on the ground to access religion. But the problem was we never imposed this condition on individuals on the ground. Individuals never had to subscribe to every single inch of dogma to achieve salvation on our side of the house, because the info slide clearly says they just had to believe in the existence of God in order to be able to go to heaven. So this probably means that it's just Christians that may have been baptized, Muslims who profess the existence of Allah. These were all individuals that were able to access heaven and access salvation on our side of the house. Therefore, the implication is simple. It was the side of proposition that had the most accessible model of religion to begin with, in which the barrier to entry and the barrier to accessing salvation was the lowest in this debate. It was never contingent on how many good acts you had to do. It was never contingent on how much money you donated. But it was the mere fact that you believed in the existence of God, you prayed to God, and that was all that mattered in this debate. But secondly, before the issues, I want to very quickly frame out their argument 3, where they tell us our model encourages crusades because religions are incentivized to force proselytization. The problem with this analysis is that the incentive for proselytization exists on both sides of the house, because religious institutions on both sides want to increase their member count. They want to ensure that they increase their influence. The problem was proselytization on their side of the house was far more harmful, because when they do increase their member count, they force those members to do worse things in order to achieve salvation. They force those members to over-sacrifice in order to donate to the church, for example, in order to truly achieve their pathway to heaven. And we think that is when proselytization was far more harmful to the people on the ground anyway. The first issue then, which side actually gets individual solace? We told you here the problem with a saved by works model is that individuals never actually feel secure. They never feel secure in their ability to achieve salvation because all you're doing is you're constantly worried about whether you have done enough good deeds, whether you have done enough good actions to counteract these sins that you may have done. That your ability to go to heaven depends on your final moral standing at the end of your life. The only odd response is that they try to symmetricize this harm. They tell us that acts of grace can also create self-doubt because you see other people praying more than you see other people doing more than you. The first thing I want to note at the top, that it's about the way the save through grace model is propagated on us of the house that differentiates from their model. And this allows us to circumvent their harms. Because the save through grace model was propagated in the way that is the idea you never had to earn your value with God. Your relationship with God was never transactional to begin with, that all individuals who are faithful can achieve salvation. So it's exactly our model that was never calculative, it was never measurable, and therefore individuals never felt the need to measure their own commitment to God compared to other individuals. The nuance that Ethiopia misses is that the way religion operates on us of the house operated in a wholly different lens to begin with, and therefore all analysis about comparing yourself already falls out because individuals never felt the need to compare themselves because individuals believe that you could all collectively go to heaven. You don't have to compete with other people, and you don't have to compete to be the model citizen and the most and the least sinful person. But secondly, therefore, this was exactly why individuals on their side of the house were the ones forced to do more than just their capabilities. This is why you cannot defend a model where individuals just donate how much money you had, because the problem was you saw everyone around you doing far more. They, for example, volunteered for 3 months to build houses for the homeless. They, for example, donated $2,000 to the church. It was the fact that people around you constantly ask you to do more then as well, that you also ask yourself to do more. Even if objectively you have already done enough good deeds, it was the fact that you constantly compared yourself to other people. The speaker before me tries to cop out of this, right? They tell us good deeds is a plethora of things. You don't only have to donate money, and that was why it was also accessible for poor people, for example. But the problem was donations were the one that tend to be the most visible form of doing a good deed. It was the most measurable way to do good deeds, where you can simply measure how much money you donate to the church every month. And therefore, this was exactly why the people on the ground was likely to perceive this as the most important thing they had to do. It was likely to be propped up within the church community as the most visible way and the most guaranteed way to get a spot in heaven. Therefore, we have proof to you, even if good things and good deeds can come in a plethora of alternatives and a plethora of ways, it was that people defaulted to the most visible acts, and that tended to be donating money. That tended to be how much time we can commit to building homeless shelters, for example. And therefore, all of our harms or inaccessibility compounds when these locks individuals and the vulnerable individuals from doing the same exact things. The way here is therefore incredibly simple. Even if opposition may say that individuals can do the last minute clutch to go to heaven, it was unclear why this was at the end of this debate the most important thing. Because the most proximate interest of a religious individual was their own path to salvation. They probably didn't care about bad people going to heaven, right? Because the point of religion in and of itself was to provide solace, that even if you suffered in the material world, you can eventually access the afterlife. That for the individuals already suffering, it was the side of proposition that told you, you can go to heaven regardless of whether or not you may have had to sin, that you can go to heaven regardless of whether you were gay or not. Before I move on, I'll take a point.
Like the amount of good deed, can faith be comparable to the level to which you buy into a specific dogma?
So I already framed this out in my observations that we never actually had to defend individuals following every inch of dogma. If you look at the info slide, if you check your notes, all you had to do was believe in the existence of God. Listen to our case. The second issue then, how does this affect institutions? So the way this should be positioned in Iran is incredibly important because this takes opposition at their best case. Even if individuals never had crippling self-questioning, even if individuals believe that they have done enough good deeds, the problem was this was manufactured by churches who now exploit the saved by work model, who guilt trip you for not doing enough and who pressure you to doing far more than your capacity. That we told you the example of mega churches to no response, right? That this was how mega churches currently operate. They constantly pressure members to donate thousands of dollars every month in order to guarantee their spot in heaven. I want to note the lack of response from this opposition. At best, they just trade this off. They say it's a good thing that people are incentivized to do good. It's a good thing that society as a whole does more good deeds. The first thing is we already question whether this was exclusive in the round, because when you believe in faith, you tend to already generally believe in God and their messaging. Therefore, people will also similarly likely to do the same acts of goodness anyway, because you do it out of the goodness of your own heart. You do it because you have an innate moral compass and you want to help other people, for example. But the difference in this debate was important. We changed the rigidity and the calculativeness attached to doing good things in the first place. This was exactly why on their side, they fell prey to manipulative messaging by the church. You're not a good enough believer, you're not a good enough follower, that we never had to depend on a malevolent church, for example. But every single church opted into this behavior because they themselves believed this was the only way to achieve salvation for the people on the ground. And that was exactly why it was so problematic on their side of the house, that this was able to be manipulated and exploited by churches who now dictate what is good enough and what you ought to do to go to heaven. The weighing is therefore simple. Even if we bite the bullet and people on our side of the house don't do as many good things and as many good deeds, we think that's fine in general. The most important thing and the most proximate thing for an individual, a religious individual, was their own relationship to God. Our stance was guilt-tripping people to self-sacrifice far more than their capacity to achieve those good things was not important in this debate, and we ought never force individuals to do that. For all those reasons, proposition.
Thank you for that speech. Now invite the op-ed.
Yes, okay. I'll take verbal POIs. Just let me set up my timer. Very sorry. Okay, I'll begin my paper. Team Malaysia have not understood the crux of this motion. This is a retrospective motion. That is to say, Judge, this doctrine would be implemented at the dawn of religion on both sides of the house. I want you to think about the last 2,000 years of history, which has been incredibly religious, at least in contemporary history, right? Think about all the religious violence that has occurred, because faith supersedes being a good person. If people believed loving your neighbor is more important than believing in God, all the anti-Muslim violence in the UK would vanish. Because in their eyes, faith, in the eyes of these Brits, faith looks like stopping the Muslim invasion of the UK. Think about all the homophobia in the world that is backed by faith, that is entrenched in dogma. These are the impacts that exist in our world, because at the beginning of religion, people would believe that being a good person, treating Muslim people with respect, not murdering them, is what gets you to heaven, rather than being a Christian nationalist, which is what they believe in the status quo, which is what they are defending. The only analysis we get against all of this that I told you, and I was also run in second speech, is saying that it's symmetric. This is what they give you. They just say, oh, this is symmetric, because the crusades can happen on both sides. But it doesn't. The only reason people do these horrible things is because they believe their faith will get them into heaven. The Crusaders believe even if I murder Muslims, I can get into heaven because I believe in God and I'm doing his work, right? That is what they ignore. They ignore the biggest impacts in this debate, right? At best, Team Proposition have an incredibly small case with incredibly minimal impacts. You can check your notes. Their entire case ignores the people who are unsure about religion, people who are conditioned from birth that Christianity is true, but in college they're questioning their faith. At best, their case only affects the people who truly do believe in God, right? Who are sure that their faith will get them into heaven, right? They ignore the biggest impact in this debate, the people who don't know if they're in the right religion, the people who truly do suffer because of faith, right? Like there's no impact on people who already believe they're going to get into heaven, right? They're already happy in the status quo. But the people who don't think this, agnostics, right? You'd rather tell them if you're a good person, you're going to get to heaven, and they'll be at ease, right? The college student who believes if I'm a good person, I'll get into heaven, does not need to be super sad because he doesn't think he believes in God anymore, right? All of these impacts exist in our world, and they've simply just not engaged on that level in this debate. They've been debating 2 layers below us. That's how this debate has played out. Now, Now, now onto some classes generally. Now, their second speaker, essentially their entire speech is on this idea that measuring good deeds is possible, and the church is going to push these things. And the third speaker comes back and says they don't engage with this. They accuse us of not engaging with these ideas. Now let's just look at what this looks like, right? They give you three reasons why good deeds will not be based on intention. And also, this is their entire extension in second as well, and third accuses of this. They say they must be visible. Church needs to vet it, so like the church has to understand that you're doing good deeds, and that good deeds can be measured, so you'll be more comparison in our world. Now, there's a big issue with literally every single word they give you under this class, right? The reason they give you assume that the church is the one that decides whether you get into heaven. For instance, they assume that the single mother working 3 jobs who feel as though she does not pay the church enough, and therefore she will not go to heaven in our rule. There's 3 core issues with this. Firstly, our second speaker told you that the dogma literally says that poor people, by virtue of them being poor and having intention to being good, are going to get into heaven. Secondly, God is not human, right? Which is to say, people believe God can read their minds. God can see into your kidneys and heart, right? This is what people believe. So even if my church is telling me I'm a horrible person, I know that God knows I'm a good person that is doing the best I can do for my children, working 3 jobs so that they can live a good life, right? It's very, also, this is a retrospective motion. In our world, it is very likely that these churches in and of themselves are less powerful, right? We try to give you this analysis and never engage with it, right? Why would the church be powerful if people don't believe dogma gets you into heaven? If I don't believe going to church is going to get me into heaven, I'll simply stop going into church. So in our world, the church is likely have much less power than it does in status quo, right? Now, before moving on, I'll take your POI.
Your case is non-comparative. On your side, violent actions are interpreted as a good deed. You're saving people from themselves who are sinners. You are saving the gays from suffering in the afterlife. Engage.
The only reason bad deeds are quote unquote good in the world is because of faith. If you did not need to believe in God, you would not have to do these things. Now, just intuition this, right, Judge? Do people hate on Muslims because they believe in the Christian God, or do they hate on Muslims because the Christian God tells you to hate on Muslims, right? It doesn't make sense. It's because they believe in God, right? There's no part of the Bible that tells you to hate on Muslims or any other group. The Bible tells you to treat everybody with respect, to treat your neighbor with respect, right? And these are the good deeds the doctrine tells you to follow. It is the institution or the intuition of people, because of this thing that proper trying to push, that leads to these things. They have not given you any good analysis on this. They're incredibly weak. Now, on the path to victory in this debate, right? On one side of the house, they have massive impact, right? Now, I just want to analyze what they want to win on. What are they trying to win on in this debate? They're trying to win by telling you that single mothers in our world are going to be pressured to give money to the church, right? This is insane for 2 reasons. There's barely the single mother community is not that big, first of all. So if you concede all of this, or in fact are outweighing essentially everything, right? And also their comparative. What is their comparative? Right? They're telling you that our comparative is a comparative where people are going to be in a world where you kind of have to like check off boxes, right? You have to like, oh, do this good deed, and that's how you're going to get into heaven, right? And they also give you analysis on their own side that you don't need to follow all of the doctrines. You don't have to be fully faithful to get into heaven. So why is it that they believe they have to do every single good deed to get into heaven? We can use this analysis. It's symmetric. This analysis exists on both sides. The church does not expect you to do every single good deed there is to do to get into heaven, in the same way that they do not expect you to do every single act of faith that exists in the religion. So all the analysis they give you is very, very minimal, right? Everything is either symmetric or just very, very low impact in their entire case. And you can look back at it, right? Second speaker, first speaker on our side give you heavy analysis with much larger impact, affecting a larger group of people who do not believe in religion, which is a big group that is growing because secularism is getting bigger, right? And again, they never engage. This is what loses them the debate. They never engage with the retrospective aspect of the debate, right? Now, I want you to imagine, because they never actually model on their side properly. Imagine a world where this faith, right? In the status quo, actions do to some extent give you some good deeds into your religion. This looks like Muslims having to donate to get into heaven, having to pray 7 times a day, etc. Right? Now, in their world, that would not exist. You would get in on faith alone. So from the beginning of Christianity, from the beginning of Islam, it would be a world where faith alone gets you into heaven in every religion, or the majority of religions. This would create a much different world to what they're proposing. because they're simply just proposing the status quo. So really, they're not proposing what they were meant to propose, and they're not debating on the ground that they're meant to be debating on. Like I alluded to in the intro, they're debating 2 layers under what the motion expects them to do so, and that is why we win this debate on an incredibly large margin. Please vote for opposition.
Thank you for that speech. Now moving on to the reply. Reply.
Okay, just checking if I'm audible.
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, start my first word. Okay. In this debate, we gave you reasons as to why we give believers more control over their salvation and ability to get into heaven, and that was our clearest path to victory. So let's talk about that clash, which is the one where we both contributed in a very substantive way. What do they give you on this clash? They say that faith being personal is the most controlled way, and it gives people more solace. The fact that you yourself have the ability to believe and do it on your terms is the thing that gives you the most solace. We responded by saying that in the worst case where we don't have any analysis, it's a completely symmetric thing. But even if it is not, we have rebutted their case by saying that faith is very dependent on just not believing in God, but also believing on which God. And then what does believing on that God mean within the religion you're subscribing to? Under the Christian faith, believing in God is not just saying God exists. It's saying that God is under Trinity. We believe in Jesus. We believe in the Holy Spirit. We believe in God the Father as well. There's a lot of there are a lot of conditions that come with just believing in God exists. What they try to give you on this idea of our burden is not to prove that God is not to prove that there's no dogmatic beliefs, it's just God exists. That's a crazy assertion to be making on their side, because that's just not how God existing, being believed, and works under the status quo, right? But even to those who already do believe, we remove the heavy anxiety that say, what if I pick the wrong religion? We are very much more universal, and as such we can apply to a greater scope of people, and even those that do not believe, those that do subscribe to a certain religion can get solace knowing that even if I pick the wrong Christian God, under the Christian God I can still keep my belief and do good deeds. And if the case is that the Muslim God is true, then I can just, the fact that I did good deeds can get me in the good graces of that God, right? We have this exclusive benefit on the anxiety that the people give. So that is a clear path to victory on this side of the debate. We could win this on a single benefit, because they say that the people who don't believe are not in this debate, which we don't conceive to. But even if we do, and we debate on the people that do believe, we have one exclusive benefit on scale and severity, because we affect a larger group of the debate where people do believe in religion, but also because we affect them in a very much more severe way, because having crisis on which God to believe out of the 3,000 that exist is the greatest drive of people being disenfranchised from religion. And as such, after winning this clash, on the clash about institutions, we gave you reasons as to why having less dogmatic buy-in will make it so that institutions have less influence, because on our side of the house, doing good deeds and getting on the good graces of whatever almighty God exists does not demand you believing in certain dogmas, except you already buy into that. On those that don't buy into it, we have an exclusive benefit here. What they give you is that on people being exploited, we told you, they say that people will be exploited because they will be demanded to give money. What do we tell you? We tell you that people will not buy into these institutions to the dawn of time, because there are just other institutions that say you can get into heaven by just doing good deeds, or by just saying, giving you money. On their side of the house, the worst case the best thing that happens is like mega churches still exist, they still demand money on our side of the house, but people will just not buy into them because you can get to heaven in a much easier way, right? But even in the worst case, money has less weight over dogma, because dogma is literally how you view the world in the whole place, right? Money is a very, very easy and losable thing, but the dogma which you subscribe into is something that you've decided to stay. This will guide my life my whole life. You could weigh this clash then is on the likelihood that people will buy into a religion that demands a certain very big amount of money when there's other religions that gives them a very easy amount of ease, but also on exclusivity, because on our side of the house, people that don't believe are getting benefited, people that don't believe are getting into heaven because they believe that they can get into heaven by just doing good things, and as such we affect a greater scope of the population. The biggest delta in this debate is where we both contributed on the believers, and since we have an exclusive benefit on that, that is the best path to victory, and that is why we win this debate. Proud to oppose.
Thank you for that speech, and I'll invite the prop reply.
Okay. If you check your notes, Ethiopia tries to win this debate on the extreme margins. They drop names of people who can't decide on religions, or the suicide bombers and crusaders that for some reason exist at every point of society. I'm really unsure at this point on the round, why are the anxious people or the fringe attacks that happen for some reason on their side is likely to happen so much more than the crux of people who are locked out every single day via religion on their side of the house, and that is why we are so proud to propose. I have 3 things in this reply. Firstly, what is the largest winning pathway that has yet to be responded to by the side of team opposition? We told you from first that our argument was always for solace on the vulnerable. Let's rein in what is the world on both sides. Malaysia tells you that you go to heaven so long you believe, and this is an unearned gift that you get no matter what. Ethiopia says you go to heaven if you are good. The problem is that opposition automatically locks out victims of circumstance who have done bad. No response to this whatsoever. This means you isolate the poor mother who had to steal baby formula to feed her newborn, or you punish the rehabilitated ex-convict who was brainwashed into a life of crime, but his actions now permanently stain his chance with God in heaven. Ethiopia relegates the lonely further into the shadows, whereas Malaysia gave them and brought them opportunity to come to the light because our merciful God tells you that you are loved and can start anew. If this debate was truly about control and the ability to find solace and ability to find something tangible in life, Ethiopia robs it off those who were lost before and double punishes them. I think this is the specific vulnerable individuals that they completely lose in today's round. Secondly, in their very best case, if you look at your notes, their only positive analysis is that you have more good deeds in societies. There are 2 things under this. Firstly, we told you from first this was not exclusive. We preemptively told you that good deeds already proliferate in the status quo because there's a general push to be compassionate. There's a rise of information towards conflict in the rest of the world, or you are generally brought up with basic moral values most of the time. I think it's extremely nihilistic to claim all good deeds we see right now are only because of the existence of God. I do not need to be a worshiper to love my mom or to love my friend. I think that's exactly why their best case was extremely unsymmetrical on their side of the house. But secondly, we told you very importantly, the flip towards this. Into no response, we told you even in their best case, you do have performative good deeds where people only create like good deeds and good things around society because they believe that is transactional to what earns them a place in heaven. That leads to a creation of a shallower society that is incapable of genuine care for one another because you believe that is the only way in which you get heaven, but not really because you care about the values that you put into. This flip that we given to you in second was also not responded to, so I think their best case was incredibly watered down. Thirdly, on the point of sacrifice, Malaysia tells you have to sacrifice to do work, and that is bad. Ethiopia tells you you have to sacrifice to be a believer, and their case shift in the latter half of the round is to talk about crusades. Not only was this already incredibly uncharitable and already responded to in Megan, but we've already flipped this, right? Assuming our very worst case where there's sacrifice on both sides, why is it that Team Ethiopia has it worse? Because maybe believers are like put into certain situations where they have to do certain bad things because they blindly believe in faith of like the religious, organizational, and the hierarchy. But the opposition has to recognize that the same hierarchy exists on their side. That means the same religious follower who like retrospectively participated in the crusades would also participate on their side of the house because they believed in the same religion. And insofar as you have that faith, but also the need and the obligation to do good according to what the church tells you to, that is when you listen to the beck and call of the manipulative church. That is when you are brainwashed to think suicide bombing is something that is a good deed that actually helps you and the people in your community. That's exactly when sacrifice becomes far worse because it's incredibly proportional to what you tangibly do, and that is when you create more abuse to happen on their side. So if they wanted to push the worst extreme minorities on our side, it becomes far worse on opposition when you allow people to influence your actions. At least you're able to opt out on an individualized faith system on ours. For all those reasons, so proud to propose.
Thank you for that speech, but I thank everyone for which was such a fun and engaging round. Again, kudos to both the teams for making it this far. Again, it's a closed round, so the decision will be announced in the main hall. So all the teams and observers, I request you to please leave the room. You can shake hands virtually.
And also, whoever has the recording, I have recorded, but it's 2 minutes late. So once you get the recording, please, if you could message me on Discord. I think, was it Arjun who was recording?
Yep, it was.
Yep.
Okay, I will message you to follow up on this. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the debate,
Thank you,
Ethiopia.
guys.
Thank you guys. Great debate.